Right. Now, all of yesterday we were here in Garissa, and we have been here throughout the weekend, and we're talking about the struggle for an identity, and a Kenyan identity at that, when we started off with Bottom Line yesterday. And I want to introduce you to a gentleman who we were with yesterday. His name is Jamal Beret. He's a law student and is also a resident of Garissa, born and bred. When we were talking yesterday, of course, we didn't get a chance to hear your story about that quest to be Kenyan, and it's all about that identity card, isn't it, Jamal? Tell us about your struggle to be Kenyan.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. My story is one among many. I remember in the year 2000, after I've cleared high school, I applied for an ID card, just like any Form 4 leaver will do. Initially, it was rejected. I got a rejection. I was told my papers were not quite in order. Mm-hmm. We tried to correct what they sought, which were just more proof to show we are Kenyans. Then after I applied, it took 2 years before I got the ID, which I finally got. But of course, then after you get an ID, that is another phase for any youth in this region.
Only half the struggle.
It's another phase which you cross with a sigh of relief, because most people will not get their IDs within 2 years. It will take up to 10 years. We've seen the story of the old man. 50 years later, he didn't have. Then in the year 2006, by this time, the year 2005, I was working for the government.
Right.
I was working at Ministry of Planning, Central Bureau of Statistics, in a project. I lost my ID. But remember, I was already a government officer.
Yes.
After I lost my ID, I reapplied for a replacement.
Yes.
Then there was no response this time. So I had to travel to Nairobi to the offices at the Registrar of Persons and ask what's going on. I thought this will take a bit. Then they told me they are unable to know how I got the initial ID. So of course this was discussion that took many days, asking me to keep coming back for another officer to see me and another one to see me, explaining myself over and over again to them. Later on they came clean and told me that they have established that I'm not a Kenyan, that the papers that I've used to apply for the ID were not mine, that they only had no option but to take back.
So in essence, your ID had been revoked?
So they told me clearly that the ID was now revoked. So I was no longer a citizen. But of course, that took me aback with a lot of shock and anger. But then I realized that this administrative officer of government really was misusing the power that he had. Indeed, he could be having the power to verify documentation of anyone who applies for the ID, but to revoke an existing ID without any, there was no proof to show that I was not a citizen. So later on, what I did was I said the best thing for me to do is to have a trail of my struggles with them. So what I did was whenever I came to visit the office, I would leave a paper or a letter or a follow-up to show that I was here last on such a date, and I'm here again.
So you
following
documented your process?
I documented my process through email to the Registrar of Persons himself. At one time, they called the CID officers and NSIS, as they were then called. So they asked me a lot of questions. What I could not understand was why, because I don't think it's ordinary for them to go that late. But I realized they were basically trying to intimidate me, because the process of acquiring an ID card is one that involves, among many other things, of course, the documentation, but you have to part with something.
So throughout this process, and you did mention when we were speaking earlier that your father was a civil servant.
Yes.
So for him to have been a civil servant, you would obviously have to have been
interestingly, one, I was born in a hospital. I was lucky to have been born in a district general hospital.
Right.
And remember, when you are born in a hospital, there's a documentation.
The notification.
There's the birth notification, which I had a copy.
Okay.
I accessed. And my father had also by this time served in the civil service for over 25 years. But they didn't want to see this side of the story, because they said the possibility was that he is not even my father, I'm faking the whole thing.
So Jamal, tell us how then you finally got your ID back after this revocation process, and you trying to document the process of you getting it back and being questioned as to your identity.
Yes. So what I did was that I went to all the offices, to the top. I think by then there was a lady at Register of Persons, and I threatened that I'm going to go to court. I told her that I have all the documentation to show that I'm a Kenyan, that my parents are Kenyans, that I was born, irrespective of whether your parent is a Kenyan or not. By the mere fact that you're born here, that automatically will have qualified anyone to be a Kenyan. So when I threatened that I'm going to court, is when, after I left the place, 2 days later, I got a call from them. They told me that I could come for my ID.
Yes.
This was in 2008.
Yes.
So finally, I managed to get my ID, which has, up to now, has a date of issue of 2008.
So a very long journey for you, 8 years to finally get the identity. Yours is the story of many here, which means there's a general, sense of despondency. And what for you is the way forward in terms of, just inclusivity? Because you would imagine that a lot of young people in this part of the country will be quite bitter with the government. What's the way forward?
Most definitely. You realize that many people will not have taken it up with the government the way I did.
Yes.
Because one, you need to travel to Nairobi. How many people will access Nairobi? For you to access Nairobi, you pass through 8 roadblocks where you must have produced the ID, which you don't have.
So how do we go from here, Jamal?
I think the best thing is, one, the time for lamenting and crying is over. We need to stand up as people who are rightfully here. More importantly, now the youth, who by the year 2030 will be 75% of this country.
Right.
We do not need to be told on how things are to be done. We need to provide the way forward to the government by, one, electing the right leadership, and secondly, we take it up with the administrative bureaucracies that when they misuse power, discretional power, many think that the officer can decide to give or not to give.
Okay.
What we need to know is that the officer has a mandate with limits within the law.
Okay.
So long as the officer is not clearly explaining to you why he's not giving you, and by then we need to ask, whenever they reject, we need to demand the rejection in writing, so that we can take it up with the courts.
Document the process just the way you did, and though it was a long struggle, you finally got that. All right, thank you very much for letting us know just what young people go through in this country in the quest to have that identity, to be Kenyan. And this is what we're talking about right here in Garissa County. And we're talking about that quest, that all-important quest to just be Kenyan. And of course, that informs a lot of the perceptions that we have in this area and indeed in many others. The discussion will continue a little later on this evening on Checkpoint. We'll have a special edition of Checkpoint coming to you live from Garissa. We will tackle Jamal's issue among many others and seek to find solutions. One of them is perhaps to document the process, and he did it within the confines of the law.